Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Advocate Weekly, your new go-to source for all things LGBTQ plus news and culture, brought to you by The Advocate. I'm your host, Kevin Ortega-Rojas. Today is March 5th, 2025, and we have a lot to unpack. This week, we'll be talking about the 97th Annual Academy Awards and the noticeable absence of LGBTQ plus winners in acting categories, and the one major win that everyone should be talking about. We will also be breaking down President Trump's new directive on transgender military members and the disturbing rollback of transgender civil rights protections in Iowa. Plus, we'll take a deep dive look at the fascinating history of circuit parties. Later in the show, we'll be chatting with Advocate Senior National Reporter Christopher Wiggins about a Supreme Court case that could have major implications for the LGBTQ plus community. And stick around, because after that, we'll be talking to Dr. Jon Paul, host of the Black Fat Femme podcast, about their new book and the importance of Black queer storytelling. Let's kick things off with the 2025 Oscars. This year's ceremony celebrated independent cinema, with Anora dominating the night, taking home 5 awards, including Best Picture and Best Director for Sean Baker. And actress Mikey Madison won her first ever Oscar for Anora, making her the first ever Gen Z actor to earn an Academy Award. But when it comes to LGBTQ plus representation in film, this year's Oscars was a complete shutout. No openly LGBTQ plus actors took home any trophies this year, despite huge films like Emilia Perez and Sing Sing starring openly LGBTQ plus talent. Still, there was a very special win on Sunday night. Paul Tazwell, an openly gay designer, won Best Costume Design for Wicked. Not only was he the sole openly queer winner of the night, he also made history as the first Black man to ever win in this category.
Thank you, Academy, for this very significant honor. I'm the first Black man to receive a Costume Design Award for my work on Wicked.
Of course, this is not the first time that LGBTQ plus representation has been a topic of discussion when it comes to the Academy Awards. Historically, the Oscars have awarded films that included LGBTQ plus characters. However, the actors who have been celebrated typically have been straight, while LGBTQ plus actors winning in major categories remains a rarity. For example, openly queer actor Jodie Foster has 2 Best Actress awards for The Accused in 1998 and The Silence of the Lambs in 1991. However, she won those awards before she came out of the closet. The last openly LGBTQ plus actor to win an Oscar was Ariana DeBose, who won Best Supporting Actress in 2022 for her role as Anita in West Side Story.
Imagine this little girl in the back seat of a white Ford Focus. Look into her eyes. You see a queer, openly queer woman of color, an Afro-Latina, who found her strength in life through art. And that's what I believe we're here to celebrate.
So while we celebrate Paul Tazwell's historic victory, the question remains, when will we see more openly LGBTQ plus winners in acting categories at the Academy Awards? Moving on, let's talk about circuit parties. This past weekend was the annual Winter Party, a weekend-long event held in Miami that draws attendees from all over the world. It is one of the most popular circuit party festivals in the LGBTQ plus community. Events like Winter Party, though, can be easily misunderstood. Without historical context, circuit parties can be overlooked and oversimplified, seen as just another opportunity for gay men to be shirtless, sexual deviants. But this week, Advocate Senior National Reporter Christopher Wiggins published an in-depth article about the evolution of circuit parties, and it's a fascinating look at how these events shape queer nightlife. From their origins in the 1970s as spaces of defiance and freedom to their role in raising funds for LGBTQ plus causes, circuit parties have always been about more than just the music and the lights. These high energy dance events have been a staple of the gay community for decades, evolving from underground spaces of liberation to massive, internationally recognized festivals, and it's a beautiful piece of LGBTQ plus history. For more on that, go to advocate.com. And when we come back, we'll actually be chatting with Christopher Wiggins about this and other major issues, like a Supreme Court case that could have major consequences for LGBTQ plus rights. Christopher, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
So before we dive into the Supreme Court and all that's going on over there, I wanted to briefly talk about a story that was just published on Advocate. You really dove into the topic of circuit parties and the history of circuit parties. What compelled you to write that?
You know, I find that circuit parties or circuit culture is really misunderstood. And it's the topic of a lot of conversations as far as people who aren't part of it think that it's, filled with vanity and vapid people just partying in excess. And then people who are part of the community, they think that it is, a revelation of sorts and something that is uh, part of the fabric of the LGBTQ experience. And back in the late 90s, early 2000s, this is a world that I kind of ventured into. And over the years, stepping out of it and looking back on it now, I was hoping to tell some stories of people who, were able to kind of flourish and blossom as they navigated that world. And so I wanted to really get an understanding of what people who are steeped in that world feel, how they go from event to event. I wanted to talk to some folks who are part of making those experiences. And what what ended up happening is I wrote and wrote and wrote, and it became a very comprehensive, shall we say, piece that it has some length to it, but I think that the storytelling is presented in such a way that it certainly should be of interest to anyone who wants to get a little glimpse into the world behind the neon lights.
Yeah, and I think listeners and viewers should definitely go to advocate.com and read it. What would you say from your experience? Because as you mentioned, this is a world that you have experienced yourself. Have there been any major changes from the 90s and early 2000s to modern day circuit parties? We see we have circuit parties on cruise ships. We have circuit parties that, a lot of folks plan their calendar around. They're like, oh, I can't, no, I can't see you the first week of March. I'll be at winter party in Miami. What have there been a lot of changes, and has some of the um, significance, do you think that it's lost on the crowd that does attend?
I think I haven't been to a circuit party in many, many years, but in speaking with people who still attend them and speaking with people who produce them and who, DJs who play them, what I've come to learn is that a lot of it's become a lot bigger. It seems to me like the productions are more elaborate, and the focus is very much on attention. And then people who are there, are very much liberated in their way in the way they express their sexuality. And so what I will say is back in the day, um, it sounds weird to say, people people went and danced and had a good time, and the hooking up was kind of kept for later or out of view. And I find that these days, from the people I've spoken to, circuit parties can be quite sex forward, and that's one thing that has definitely changed over time. Another thing, though, is that I find that circuit parties now are akin to music festivals that the straight community kind of has adopted, and they travel around from place to place. And the attention on social media content, whether that's rated R or X or just rated G or PG content, there's a lot more focus on capturing video and photos of moments than there was, back in the late 90s and early 2000s. In those days, people were present at the event. They were there to hear the music. They were there to follow the DJs, to see each other's friends, and to stand on the dance floor hearing the beats of a track that you really want to hear, but the DJ is teasing it and teasing it and teasing it, and the only way you can hear it is there because only that DJ has it. Nowadays, everyone has the music, everyone is there with the camera, and so I feel like, there were lots of things back then that probably would not have happened if cameras were on everyone's mind all the time. But just like everything else, I feel like I've come to learn that when people focus a lot of their attention on capturing what's going on through a small screen, they may miss what's going on in the periphery. And so I think maybe circuit parties also suffer a little bit from that.
Yeah, and do you think that it's the audience, or rather the spectators, who are just sort of treating circuit parties kind of like a tourist attraction? Because I've gone to a few circuit parties, and for me, I'm like, I would probably not be at one of these for a while, and these experiences are few and far between for me. So I think I can say I'm probably guilty of that to some extent. But my experience, at circuit parties has always been, we can talk about like sexual liberation and how sex forward it is, but I think that is also part of like, the liberating experience of it. And but it's always like really kind. They're just like really welcoming spaces, despite what people may think. And I think that is attributed to what you just mentioned, the social media content, because the people who post on social media who are going to get the most engagement, the most likes, and the most shares are the people who are deemed, the most conventionally desirable, who fit into certain beauty standards. And so that's all you see. But these spaces, at least what I know of, are usually really welcoming, and you see everyone there.
Yeah, I have found the same thing, and but back when I was attending circuit parties, I'm not a white muscle boy in any which way, obviously. I've never been had that look, right? But I've always felt very welcome at circuit parties because I traveled with friends, right? Friends, you make plans. You and your group of friends, you make plans to go. Then you travel to whatever place it is where it's going on, and then you enjoy yourself there. You may browse who's there. You may find a friend for the night, or for longer or for shorter. But ultimately, it was an experience where everyone was there enjoying themselves, and so I have never felt unwelcome. I will say that to your point, the fact that people who have the more traditionally accepted beauty standards, their content does better. I do think that maybe an element of that creates a certain level of exclusion, but I don't. I'm in my experience, I have never felt unwelcome at a circuit party. Have I, felt I got weird looks or something like that? Of course, but people are, when you're in a place with thousands of people, you're going to find people who are going to give you a look, and people are going to give you a smile. And I have always chosen to focus on those who gave me a smile as opposed to those who may have given me a weird look.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. All right, well, for listeners and viewers, Christopher's piece, The History of the Circuit Party, is available at advocate.com if you want to read some more on that. Now we're going to shift gears and talk about a little bit more of a serious topic, the Supreme Court. Just a little bit more serious. Last week, you attended oral arguments in DC. Can you tell us a little bit about the case that the Supreme Court is hearing arguments about?
Yeah, so the case is Ames versus Ohio Department of Youth Services, which is basically a case where a straight white woman, Marlene Ames, is claiming that she was denied a promotion and fired over less qualified LGBTQ employees who she claims were promoted instead of her. And the question isn't necessarily about whether straight people can be discriminated against or white people can be discriminated against, but rather whether a majority group has to meet a higher burden of proof in order to prove a discrimination case. So what this means is in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, they have a level standard that is a little higher, where someone has to provide basic evidence required to show that there was possible discrimination. And then there's like this framework of it's a little complicated, but the point is the justices are going to decide whether people who are part of the majority group have to present additional evidence in order to prove that an employer has discriminated against them.
Right. And so, from your perspective and what you heard, did you get a feeling or a sense of how the justices were leaning when it comes to this case?
You know, I have to preface this by saying I'm not a lawyer, although I would love to play one on TV. But I get the feeling from listening to the questions that the justices were asking that all of them, or most of them, and it seemed like from both sides of the political spectrum, seemed to not endorse the notion that you should need to have extra evidence if you're part of a majority group. So essentially, I think that they are leaning in the plaintiff's favor. The questions from the justices really drilled down on the language in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals decision, where there was language to the effect of, if the person were gay, their appeal or their case may have moved forward. And so that language in and of itself, I think that Justice Kagan got very much stuck on the language, and there were some jokes that were made with the attorneys about, if language means what it says, then we should let it mean what it says, and people chuckled. But ultimately, it does seem to me that the justices may be ruling in favor of the plaintiff in this case. Now, I am not good at foretelling what the justices will do. I have this thought that they always wait. They release a couple of relatively sane opinions throughout the year, and then save the crazy ones, the ones that disappoint the country for the last few weeks of their session. But that's just kind of my thing.
Yeah. So I and we will all take what you say with a grain of salt and understand that you are coming to this from a journalist perspective and not a legal one. But from your understanding and the research that you've done, what are the possible consequences or implications of the Supreme Court ruling in favor of the plaintiff? We've heard people talk about how this will validate the idea of reverse discrimination. So what does that potentially do to LGBTQ plus people, or how will it impact LGBTQ plus people?
Yeah, the concept of reverse discrimination or reverse racism, I get where that language comes from. Obviously, discrimination is discrimination, and racism is racism, whether in one way or another. But as far as this case, what I fear it will do, rhetorically, right, is rhetorically, if the justices do side with the plaintiff, it will give people a kernel of truth in the argument that there is this thing, reverse racism. In reality, what this will do is reshape how employment discrimination law is handled, right? And so ultimately, what it'll do is make it so that there is that the burden of proof for everyone is equal. Uh, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, she kind of made a point in wondering whether that would open the floodgates to other lawsuits, right? To frivolous lawsuits, or to just everyone suing their employer claiming that they were discriminated against because they think that because they're white and the black person was promoted over them, or because they're straight and the LGBTQ person was promoted over them. So, and the attorneys kind of got into a back and forth about how there are other safeguards against that kind of thing. But I do fear that, as we see, this is a litigious country. People will probably take their case to court and want to sue for a number of slights that they perceive as because they were discriminated against. So, obviously, it's hard to believe that when you're part of a majority group and the majority group is in charge, that someone from that group is treating you in a way that is detrimental to you. But we all perceive things differently, and I suppose it is possible that someone could be discriminated for being straight and white by their boss who is straight and white.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think what your explanation highlights is Americans, in my opinion, need to do a better job at understanding what the Supreme Court's role is, right? Their job is simply to interpret the law and nothing else. The consequences of it fall on other people. And of course, when they set new precedents, people, as people do, will take that and try to test it and stretch the law and see how far they can go. But that is ultimately not what the Supreme Court is there to do. They are not listening to this case with the intention of maligning or harming the LGBTQ plus community, but it is possible that down the road, the results of this could do that because of other people, right?
Yeah, to your point, the justices aren't deciding whether it is true that that this woman was discriminated against because she was straight, or that these LGBTQ people were unqualified in some way, or that's not the question that the court is addressing. They're not looking at that. They are merely looking at the question of whether someone who is part of a majority group has to meet a higher burden of proof in order for their case to succeed than someone who is part of a minority group. That's all.
Yeah, well, thank you. That was a great explanation of, I think, a really important topic. Really appreciate it. All right,
Yeah.
Chris, that is all. Those are all the questions I have for you. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. See you soon.
And we're back with some more headlines you need to know about. President Donald Trump announced that transgender military service members in the Air Force and Space Force will have a deadline to resign or face potential discharge. Advocacy groups are already gearing up for legal challenges, arguing that this policy violates the rights of transgender service members who have served honorably. The courts will likely play a crucial role in deciding the future of this policy, but for now, thousands of transgender people are facing an uncertain future. Next up, Iowa has officially rolled back legal protections on the basis of gender identity, essentially making it legal to discriminate against transgender people in areas like education, housing, employment, and public accommodations. This move is part of a larger wave of anti-LGBTQ plus legislation sweeping across conservative-led states. But let's take a step back. What happens when any civil rights protections are rolled back? History shows us that when the rights of one marginalized group are eroded, it sets a dangerous precedent that can impact others. The fight for LGBTQ plus equality has always been tied to broader struggles for civil rights, and this is no exception. And this isn't just about Iowa. It's about the national trend of rolling back protections and the fight to stop discrimination from becoming the law of the land. One Iowa senator blasted his Republican colleagues inside the state capitol last week after the law was passed. Take a listen.
This isn't your average bill running through this chamber. You're hurting people. What have they ever done to you? Most of you don't even know somebody who's transgender. You don't even know them, but you hate them. You have to hate them because you cannot do what you're doing today if you didn't.
When we come back, I'll be joined by Dr. Jon Paul. All right, everybody, we are back. And now I have the pleasure of introducing a very special guest. Jonathan P. Higgins, also known as Dr. Jon Paul, is the host of the Black Fat Femme podcast on iHeartRadio and is now a published author. Their book, Black Fat Femme, Revealing the Power of Visibly Queer Voices in Media and Learning to Love Yourself, is available for pre-order now on Amazon or wherever you get your books. And we are going to welcome Dr. Jon Paul to talk to us a little bit more about the book. Hello.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm amazing. How are you?
I'm doing all right, hanging in there.
As well as can be.
Yeah.
But this is a celebration, so I'm doing really, really well. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So, before we get into the book, the context of the book, and all of the things that this is about, I want to talk about you and your work ethic, because I know that Advocate, we've already chatted a bit about your book on our website, and we will make sure to remind people to go to advocate.com to read a little bit more about you and the book. But personally, as someone who is friends with you on social media, you're like one of my, Threads cousins. We engage very often. And I am like, this person is hustling.
Yeah.
This book is going to be read. Okay. So how does it feel to finally have this out into the world?
Yeah, it's a little surreal. Sometimes I turn around and she's right there behind me. And so, it's almost like, some people are so excited to have a child. That's what it feels like. I feel like, my baby's out in the world and, she's going to be here and, folks will get to engage it and we'll get to, talk about it or, bring me in to have convos about it. And, I've said this in several different ways. I've made sure to let folks know that this book is truly not about me trying to uplift my story. It's about giving other youth, specifically like queer youth who don't have context of what the world was like or is like, something that they can connect to. So it's very much kind of like being able to give, birth to something that you feel like everyone in the world would be able to engage in.
Yeah, and we are so incredibly lucky to have you and your work. And absolutely, like thinking back to being 16, 17, what it would have been like to have a book with someone who was, being unabashedly themselves, someone who I could look to, who I could relate to. This is going to do so much for so many people.
Yeah, thank you.
What has the process been like? Because you are, like I said, working really, really hard, and you're doing a lot of this on your own. So
Yeah.
what does it feel like to accomplish this, and what's the process been like for you as an independent person?
I will say this, to anyone, who's wanting to publish a book, I wish that there was more information for Black, queer, fat, non-binary, marginalized people in general, more information about what it's like to publish. But what I will say is this, there's a lot of, when you are minoritized, you have to hold people accountable. And I think that's been the biggest thing is, one, pushing my own story and telling people, now y'all are going to hear me, like, regardless of if you think the story is important or not, you're going to hear me. But also having to make sure that you hold others accountable for supporting you in the process of getting the word out. And so with writing this book and with telling my story and, using it to kind of encourage other people to use their voice as storytellers, I think the process has been just a lot of me having to pour into, the world will try to make you feel gross about being shameless in terms of how you plug your work. But having to get over that, right? Really having to say, I have something to say, and the world is going to hear it, regardless of if you support it or not. So, yeah, that's been the word for me. Is I've had to let go of the shame in being shameless in terms of plugging my work. So.
Yeah, I mean, and it works, and no one's going to support you like, you. No one's going to
Yeah.
what's the word? Oh, I mean, look at where we are. No one's going to advocate for
Right.
you,
Right.
like you are your biggest advocate. So getting into the book,
Yeah.
the title immediately, Black Fat Femme, which is also the title of your podcast, which I love. How do you imagine people are going to receive the title when they walk into a bookstore and they see it? Like, what reaction do you anticipate, and
Mhm.
what reaction do you hope for when people see that?
Yeah. Well, so this is the thing, we live in a world where in all facets, I say this in the book in different iterations, but, I've always known to some degree that I'm everything that the world despises, right? The world despises Black people, the world despises fat people, and the world despises queer people, right? And so the idea of having visibly queer in the title was intentional, right? It was very intentional in this idea of saying, I know you despise me. I know you have, your thoughts and your stereotypes and whatever aggressions you carry, right? All of the homophobia, all of the femphobia, all of those things exist around me, and I'm still going to take up space, right? And so I hope that when folks walk into a bookstore and they see, whether it be one or two copies of my book somewhere in the store, that they recognize that, it took me a long time to get to a place where I could be comfortable, not only in this body and in this experience, but also in taking up space. And I hope that my book will encourage them to do the same thing, right? Take up spaces, whether it be in their careers, whether it be in their families, whether it be in, relationships, whatever the case may be, right? We deserve to own the space. We deserve to have all the things the world says that we don't. And so that's really what this book is. It's a testimony to the idea that the world, I talk about this towards the end of the book, but the word is audacity. There's a certain audacity to me being me, and I'm learning even in this book process, right? Even in the pre days of releasing this book, I'm learning more about my own audacity in promoting this book and telling people to read it and to own it. So.
Yeah, and I know that you've made it very clear what the message and the mission and intention behind this book is, and it's wonderful and it's beautiful. But I think that what you are speaking to right now is such a great reminder to, whoa, why am I getting emotional about this? It's such a great reminder to non-LGBTQ plus folks and non-Black folks to listen to our voices and listen to our stories, because if we can do it, this should serve as inspiration. It should, one, serve as a reminder to treat people with humanity and dignity and allow people to be who they are, but also to inspire other people, because this is inspiring. And it's like, if this person with all of the cards that they have been dealt has the audacity to write this book and publish this book and take up space and do this work for the benefit of other people, for the benefit of kids you haven't even met yet, then
Right.
what can other people accomplish? So I think that's incredible, and I think that everyone should be reading this book. You mentioned, I saw a post, you tied Beyonce into all of this. Can you tell me a little bit about that? I really loved that.
Yes. So I do have a book tour, and the way I tied it in, I said, like Beyonce, she's added more dates. And so yeah, I will say this, it was so hard at the beginning, when the book was announced. I don't really feel like folks were like, I don't want to, how do I say this without getting in trouble? The reality was, it was hard to put a book tour together at the beginning. When the talk of a book tour was there, I had a very hard time with getting folks to believe in that idea of me doing a book tour. One, because people were like, oh, it may not sell, and I don't think it. But I was like, no, I think it's not just about the book. It's about me being in spaces with people, regardless of if it's two or 5 or even 10 people. It's me telling them, no, you have a story to tell, you need to tell it, right? And so when I posted about the how hard it was to put this book tour together, it was so cool to see so many bookstores come out and say, no, we have the people, we've got LGBTQ book clubs, we got folks who will want you to be in the space. And now it's almost to a point where, I'm having to tell people, I'm sorry, we'll have to push the date back, because, we have 12 dates that are locked in, and Mother can only do so much, because she got a full-time job too. so the reality is it was really a 180, right? I went from feeling like no one saw the book and cared about it to now being in a place where I'm having to lovingly tell people, yo, we're going to have to extend dates and move things around and push dates out. So it's been a really cool experience.
That's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
So before I let you go, I want to talk a little bit about who was Dr. Jon Paul for you? Who did you look to? I know that figures like yourself are, few and far between, but when you were growing up, who did you look to? Who gave you a sense of hope and inspiration? Who instilled that audacity in you, either public figures or people in your own life?
Yeah. So I always, and this is the thing, as you read the book, you'll learn that I speak very, very fondly of my mother in the book, because my mother was a very huge, and she still is, still to this day. I love that woman to the moon. And, we've had our ebbs and flows, but I will tell you that the one thing my mother has always been is a supporter of me. And she's always been my rock, right? And even in her challenges of understanding me, she has, done the work to really be there as a good mother. And so I speak very highly of her in the book. But I will also say it was other folks, that I saw, and again, I talk about them in the book. It was folks that I had even, though I didn't know them, I got glimpses of them in different facets, right? It was the Andre Leon Tallies, it was the Miss J, it was the Miss Lawrence, the Derek J. It was, it was even Latrice Royale. And I talk about in one of my chapters, this really dark place I was in, and how Latrice Royale really, shined a light into it. And I'm like, oh, try not to cry about it. But it's just seeing Black Fat Femmes who were so authentically themselves, taking up space in places and in spaces where folks were trying to make them a joke, and really seeing them take that back and say, nah, the joke's on you, I'm here, right? And you're gonna see me, and you're gonna eat it. And that's the thing I love about, again, having this work and being able to do this work. I'm now in community with a lot of those people, and I'm able to give them their flowers while they're alive, and tell them, like, if it was not for you, I would not be here, Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. I am so proud of you and so happy for you. And I cannot wait to get my copy of the book. Do we have a New York date yet for this tour?
So I will be in Queens on April 7th. There's no official I'm not officially at a bookstore in New York yet. But keep your eyes peeled. There is talk. We're just trying to lock down space and location, but it's coming. So
amazing. So where can people get more information about the book tour, and where can they order the book, which does come out on March 25th?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you can find, if you head over to you can always head over to www.drjonpaul.com for all things related to the book. Wiley is the publisher. Wiley has also been putting out stuff. And then also, if you follow me on social, at Dr. Jon Paul, I am posting anywhere and everywhere about this tour. And so if you're interested in stopping at one of the 12 dates that we currently have, you can check it out specifically on Instagram, but on all the socials where I can be found.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
This is going to do wonders for so many people. And I just cannot wait to revisit this conversation with you later down the road.
For sure. Thank you for having me.
That is all for this week's episode of The Advocate Weekly. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back next week with an all-new episode. Until then, please make sure to subscribe to The Advocate Weekly wherever you get your podcasts, and if possible, leave us a rating and a review. Until next time, I'm your host, Kevin Ortega-Rojas. Take care. To read more stories like the ones you heard today, go to advocate.com. This episode was executive produced by Kevin Ortega-Rojas. Special thanks to our associate producers, Kayla Gagnet and Alex Cooper, and Eric Bowie for technical support. And special thanks to Advocate Senior National Reporter Christopher Wiggins and our special guest, Dr. Jon Paul.